1816 was an unseasonably cold year. In fact, it was snowing in May. They say that the day the snow rained down was the day an extraordinary child was born. He wasn't born rich or famous, nor did anyone other than his parents seem to acknowledge the birth. But Leopold Redpath was destined to lead a turbulent life indeed. Unusually for children around the time, Leopold's parents did strive to give each of their children an education. The family wasn't on the poverty line, but with 10 mouths to feed, Leopold's father James struggled to keep the family's head above water. He could have easily saved himself the money and time with education, but he knew it mattered and presented a petition to the Board of Governors at Christ's Hospital for a grant to send at least one of his sons to their private school for higher education. Luckily, the grant was successful, and Leopold was the chosen candidate. While this was a great opportunity, it meant for the young 8-year-old, he would be sent packing from his family to the boarding school many miles away. Leopold's schooling was harsh. He was expected to rise at 6 a.m. for lessons, and the rod and lash were ever present. Even at such a young age, schoolmasters wouldn't think twice caning a child, such as their modern discipline. When Leopold was 11, he was transferred to another school nearer the city of London and nearer to his parents. He was still very strictly controlled and would only be allowed to see his family on one Wednesday a month. This school, however, taught Leopold more specialist subjects: Latin, French, maths, writing and drawing, and had dedicated schools for each one. As well as being an education centre, Christ's Hospital School was also famous in the area for throwing a number of ceremonies. On Easter Tuesday in particular, the boys were taken to the Lord Mayor's mansion house, where each child received a glass of wine, 2 buns and a shilling. For Leopold, who almost certainly would have taken part, this event would have shown him the high life and just what he could achieve. By the age of 19, Leopold had left school and was working in the city with a local ship trader. But the salary was not enough for Leopold, and not long after he was moonlighting as a shipping and merchant insurance broker. Working in the insurance sector myself, the regulations surrounding insurance today is like Fort Knox. But even back then, insurance brokering was regulated, and you needed, and still need today, a license to prove that you are competent. You simply can't announce you're suddenly a broker and expect to get away with it, especially when the risk, such as shipping and trade, is extremely high. Leopold knew this, so in 1839 he took the steps to legitimise the business. This included getting the license he needed, and he had to be part of a guild. The guild was unusual, as the law didn't specify that the guild had to be specific to the insurance. Therefore, Leopold chose the cheapest and easiest guild to join, a spectacle makers. That done, all he had to prove was he had a premises and applied to become a freeman. On the 9th of December, Leopold took his oath to become a sworn broker. The oath, taken before a court, swears him to conduct his business without fraud or deceit. His sideline business was now somewhat legitimate. It was obvious to some, however, that Leopold was spending more than his paychecks could cover, even with this little side hustle. He was able to purchase a house, a very stylish, newly built house, and with it more social standing. But the shipping company was suspicious and eventually let Leopold go. Leopold would go on to deny this, but many employees said that the sudden removal was down to embezzlement. As Leopold moved upwards socially, he crossed paths with a gentleman called Thomas Fox. Fox had a well-known upholstery business and had been speaking to Leopold. Leopold told him that he was to marry the daughter of one of the directors of another business which Thomas was a clerk. Thomas, very happy for the young couple, offered new furniture to help furnish the newlyweds' house. Leopold was humbled by the offer and readily accepted. What Thomas was unaware of, that Leopold was marrying, that was true, but not to the girl he was thinking. Instead, Leopold married a young Jessie Sherman, not some wealthy director's daughter, but a girl some would say was personally attractive. As the two settled into their newly refurbished homes, not even 2 months had gone by when the bailiffs were at the door. Leopold had used the same ruse on many different tradesmen around the city, and now the tradesmen, realising they'd been tricked, had come to collect. He owed thousands of pounds to people, debt he simply couldn't repay. Leopold was declared bankrupt, but thanks to a legal quirk, he managed to avoid jail. He did lose his house and his furnishings, but he was allowed to keep his brokering licence and his job. Leopold's items went up for auction, but it made a tenth of what was lost. Although he had lost his home, he was debt-free and free to continue. Leopold tried to continue, but his broker business had liquidated. Jessie had moved to be a lady companion in another part of London, and he was now searching the city, desperate for a job. He found one. His job was to become a clerk, dealing with shares for none other than the railway. Leopold found work as a clerk not for one, but 2 railway companies, the Brighton and Chichester and the London and Brighton line. The job would be temporary, and he would work in the offices near London Bridge, registering shares. In 1845, Jessie, desperate to keep her husband's employment, wrote a letter to a friend who was a railway official, begging on Leopold's behalf for a permanent role. Leopold was given a glowing reference and the job was secured. A few years later, after 2 more glowing references, Leopold was recruited to the Great North Railway. Leopold worked hard to gain favour and had impressed the big bosses upstairs, so much that they gave him a pay rise of £30. He saw this as an insult and began to garnish his own wages himself. In just 2 years, he had managed to make £16,875 disappear from the balance book and appear in his own pocket. To cover up his tracks, he let slip to many in the know that he was investing in the stock market with increasing success. Leopold and Jessie moved into a smart new house, full of little luxuries, and even had 2 living servants. It was pretty good considering that Leopold's wages were just £160 a year. In 1852, the GNR's newest terminal, King's Cross, had opened to the world. It was a masterpiece, and now Leopold's new office. He could travel there daily, falsifying the reports and putting more and more money into his swelling bank account. His dodgy dealings had now enabled him to move out of the seemingly inadequate housing he was in and move up market, namely Chester Terrace, a place where the upper class tend to play and where the rent alone would easily outstrip his salary. This place would easily be described as a mansion with accommodations for many servants and where he could entertain parties for the most social elite. Leopold had learnt lessons from his past and had many good dealings with the local tradesmen, making sure that they were fairly paid for their goods. And in a crass and almost boasting move, he had even invited Great North Railway colleagues to the opera on several occasions in a private stall he had rented out. Leopold started to get a lot of notoriety and soon started to share the wealth. Even before his bankruptcy, Leopold had always been generous to local charities. While the money he gained was illegitimate, he did give a lot of donations to various charities and causes. Many times he was singled out as a special mention at events for his generosity. His work enabled him to be welcome at many gentlemen's clubs. For Leopold, he had everything, and the only thing left for him was acknowledgement and invitation to the royal court. With his charm, looks, wealth and philanthropy, a royal recognition was only round the corner.